We are on to week 14 with the top 10 plays on the slate. And let's start it off right away, ladies and gentlemen, and you beautiful fellas, with the top 5 running backs right now. The number 5 running back on the slate as of the current news that we have of this recording. Come on down, the newly found hands. The newly found hands to catch that bread and maybe even make some more now that the contract is almost over in Las Vegas. Josh Jacobs. Hey, Mr. Josh Jacobs coming off a career high 9 receptions. But over the last month of the season, the man's seen 21 receptions. And now you have no Kenyon Drake, who broke his ankle. Prayers up to him. You have Peyton Barber in that backfield, who's not much. And then Jalen Richard, who is dealing with COVID and might return for this game. He is a pass catcher for sure, but this usage has been stable all season long. And now you get Josh Jacobs right here on my projections. You can check him out down below in the description. 15.4 fantasy projection at $6,200. His team has a 20-point implied total. It's not good. They're nearly 10-point underdogs to the Kansas City Chiefs. But this newfound pass-catching role, and I don't think that off of COVID, Jalen Richard's going to come right back and be a massive threat. I mean, Jalen Richard was the John Gruden lover boy. Like, that's the only reason why Jalen Richard is still on this roster is because John Gruden loved him. When there's a more talented player and Josh Jacobs out there, he's going to stay on the field more. So even if you're down by 10, hey, I'll take another, maybe not 9 target, 9 reception game, but 5 reception game. At this price point, it starts to look good. This is a really strong price range, by the way, and kind of lead into some of these other players. He's going to have a positive 13% run blocking advantage while the game is close. And look, it's a 10-point spread, but this game could be a 7-point game for most of the time. I mean, it's a neutral game script at that point, and he faces the number 29 ranked Chiefs run defense. Quietly this season, you have Josh Jacobs having 14 or more fantasy points, which is a solid projection at this price point even. You want more than that, but it's not killing your lineups if he only goes for 14, 15 in 7 out of 10 games. And he has 11 or more fantasy points in 9 out of 10, 90%. The easy math there for you. So this is a interesting spot for Jacobs, who now is a top 12 running back in target share and also just overall volume of targets. Now, Jacobs is number 5. And if there's some honorable mentions, guys who are just missing out, Jamal Williams will be in that range if Swift is indeed out. Elijah Mitchell, if Kamara returns. These guys are all in that range of being in the top 5, but they just miss out in the projections down below. Now, we'll transition into the number 4 running back on the slate. And this number 4 running back on the slate is going to be a man who will end up actually being the number 1 if another running back in his backfield is indeed out. And he was the number 1 running back in fantasy in week 13 in his first ever start. The rookie out of UNC, Javonte Williams. Everybody saw him do it in prime time. If you haven't, you probably heard about it. He absolutely popped off in prime time. He had 32 opportunities. He saw 9 targets. He breaks through 100 yards. He has a receiving touchdown and over 70 receiving yards. And he was the number 1 running back for over 32 Draftkings points. Ended up being in a primetime game on Sunday Night Football. Javonte Williams is my number 4 graded running back, and that's assuming Melvin Gordon returns. I'm giving Javonte Williams, instead of his 49% snap share in the season, I'm giving him the majority of the workload here, 60 to 65% of the snaps, even if Gordon is back. I think he's earned more of that, and I don't think Gordon will be fully healthy back from this injury. So at worst, I think that Javonte Williams is a top 5 running back play this week against the Detroit Lions defense that ranks dead last in tackling, 32nd, and bottom 5, borderline bottom 5 in overall run defense. This is a solid matchup. If there's no Melvin Gordon, he becomes the number 1 play in the week, and it's not going to shock anybody. He becomes the number 1 play on the week this week, the rookie Javonte Williams, and then we monitor ownership to see if we have to get away from it, but at this price point, I don't think you do that. So with Melvin Gordon even in, I have him for 14.8 fantasy points, and this Denver team, in this good of a matchup, a 4-point favorite with a very nice 25-point team total. You don't see them having that good of an advantage most of the time. A positive 36% run blocking advantage is one of the better ones of the matchup for these Denver running backs. And yeah, we saw that fantastic first game. He saw 80% of the snaps. He saw an elite overall workload in that game. And even with Melvin Gordon playing in some of these games, I mean, this is the last 4 games for Javonte Williams. And 3 out of 4 of those games, including what you just saw in week 13, he has 110 or total yards or more. 110 total yards or more, so that's good, even with Melvin Gordon in for 2 of those. He has at least 2 red zone touches or more in each game. He has 17 or more opportunities in 3 out of 4 of the games. And he has back-to-back games now of 20-plus fantasy points. I mean, he is a surefire. I mean, next year, where's he going to go? First-round pick if Melvin Gordon's not there? First-round pick for Javonte Williams, top 5. If he can close off this year hard, I mean, there's a lot of upside here for him to have that Antonio Gibson, Jonathan Taylor type hype. So Javonte Williams is looking solid for me where he sits right now. And before we get into the number 3 running back play, I'll let you know about a prop that I've taken on Prize Picks. I've taken the over 230.5 passing yards in a great matchup against the Texans for Russell Wilson. There's a lot more we'll talk about Russell Wilson when we maybe, and spoiler alert, talk about one of his receivers when we get to the top 5 values on wide receiver in this video. But Russell Wilson is somebody who, I mean, he looked fantastic. His season high efficiency, 81% completion percentage in that last game. It looks like he's over this finger injury now, about a month and a half removed from it. So we like Russell Wilson over 230.5 passing yards. And this matchup against the Texans, I have him in the 270s. If you want to take this prop right here that's on the screen, over 230.5 passing yards, you can get a free bet up to $100 on this site called prizepicks.com if you use the code SAL. my name, my first name, SAL. You get a free bet up to $100. Take advantage of it. So the number 3 running back on the slate. Now we start to get into this range where, look, you have a $5,900 Javonte Williams, $6,200 Josh Jacobs. The slate in general, you don't have a ton of insane value. CMC is hurt. Jonathan Taylor isn't on the slate, or a ton of, not values, there's values, but insanely priced players, right? I mean, Ekeler at $8,300 is the most expensive. So this mid-range naturally is going to be a spot where we find a lot of plays. And hopefully later in the week, as we get to the final thoughts and we get to the that one dude, we can start talking in depth about the leverage plays, which players in this range are not going to be owned. I have a feeling that this player is going to be owned, though, and you can check out my early ownership projections on Patreon down below. But Antonio Gibson, another player in this price range at $6,000. I have him for 15.5 fantasy points, a 22.5 implied team total, and he's about a 5-point underdog. So here's the thing. J.D. McKissic is expected back from his concussion. We'll track that throughout the week, but he's expected back from his concussion. And Antonio Gibson in the last 2 games with McKissic out, I mean, he's seeing like 13 targets. He's seeing the targets flow in a little bit. I don't know how sticky those are going to be, but the thing that is impressive is since the week 9 bye, and now this is 4 games for Antonio Gibson, since that time, he is a top 5 running back in the NFL. He is now the number overall 11 running back on the season, and he's had 27.5 opportunities per game since that week 9 bye. He's coming off of a game this past week where he saw 29 of 33 possible opportunities out of the running backs. That's 88%. That's elite usage. 88% would basically be top 2 in the NFL, up there with Najee Harris over the course of a season. That being said, McKissic is due back, but I think McKissic coming back just limits his projection from being in like the 17 or 18s, and it keeps him here at still a very solid projection for the price tag. So what else you're getting since that week 9 bye is 22 or more fantasy points in 3 out of 4 games, right? The only bad week was week 11, where he still saw 19 carries. Just the game script didn't allow him to run many routes. He only ran 4 routes and saw no targets, and he just missed a 100-yard bonus by 5 yards. 19 carries for 95 yards is still a pretty damn solid game. You're getting 5 yards per clip there. It just didn't translate. He had a fumble in that game. He played his least snaps of the season, basically in the 40-45% range. So it was just an overall weird game, but he still saw 19 opportunities, right? Still a solid real-life game on 5 yards per clip. On the season, he's top 5 in rushing yards. He's number 4 in red zone touches. He has that role secured. He's number 7 in yards created, meaning that he can do it independent of his offensive line and offense. And Washington football team is number 5 in rushing plays per game. So he looks to be fine, looks to be healed from these hairline fractures, the stress fractures that were in his feet and his ankles and his legs and whatever it might have been. He's looking good as a number 3 play. Now, I do think he picks up ownership because he just delivered for people last week. People like that he's trending in the right direction, getting all these touches. I'm talking about him. People are talking about him. So I think the number 2 value play for me, who I actually like this week, a terrible situation for him in terms of the offensive line, his offense surrounding him, the quarterback he'll have to play with this week. But I think he might end up being a leverage play, right? He might end up being a really good leverage play at the exact same price as Antonio Gibson, $6,000 Saquon Barkley I have for 15.6 fantasy points. So the same price and basically the same projection. They're both not in great spots. I mean, Saquon, a 17.5 team implied total is terrible as a 10.5 point underdog. Likely his starting quarterback is Jake Fromm, who had a fine preseason with like the Buffalo Bills. Didn't even know he was on the Giants until this week. I'm not even sure Jake Fromm or Saquon knew that he was on the team, right? But you're going to get a good matchup here. I mean, the Chargers ranked 23rd in run defense. Last week, they kind of sold out to stop the run against a Bengals team that wanted to establish it, 30-plus touches to mix in the 2 previous weeks before that. I don't know what they're going to do here. I don't know if they're going to sell out to stop the run in Saquon Barkley as much as they did in that game when they got a 24-0 lead, and then they didn't really have to worry about the run, so it's kind of skewed the stats because the Bengals are playing catch-up for most of that game. But a positive 36% run blocking advantage is one of the rare scenarios where you're getting a positive matchup for this offensive line of New York Giants. That doesn't happen often. And I'm going to expect some heavy workload from Saquon Barkley in this game. Who else are you going to rely on? I mean, Sterling Shepard and Kadarius Toney are maybe not back. You have now a rib injury for Kenny Golladay, so who else are you going to rely on, right? You might as well check it down a bunch like they did last week with Mike Glennon, 9 checkdowns to Saquon Barkley in that game. So Saquon Barkley in his last 2 games where he's been fully healthy, not limited, his last 2 fully healthy games, weeks 12 and 13. Week 12, you see 18 opportunities on 82% of the snaps, 5 targets. And then last week, 20 opportunities on 78% of the snaps. So he's getting a full-time role. He sees a very solid 9 targets last week. So your biggest concern is a 17.5 point team total. How often are they going to be in the red zone? I mean, he's the biggest threat, but you're getting a workhorse back here, a 3-down back, playing a lot of snaps and seeing opportunities. And oh yeah, the targets are there. So I do think like if this week you see Antonio Gibson, he was like 20% owned last week. If he's 20% owned this week and Saquon's pushing like 8 to 10% ownership, I'll take half the ownership because I have them at similar projections, and they're both going to be hovering right around 20 opportunities in this game. So I think that's an interesting spot for Saquon Barkley. Again, The reason why nobody wants to play him, just like Miles Sanders burning people in the past, is because he's in a terrible offense. It's not looking good. I mean, last week Miles Sanders had Gardner Minshew. We like that spot, right? I get it, a much better offensive line and run blocking team, but I do think there's some leverage opportunities every single week. Early on, this is looking like one of them, but we'll check back as the ownership comes in later in the week. Now, the number one running back play on the entire week is somebody who looks absolutely fantastic this week. All the news that we've gotten up until this point as I record this midweek is only getting better for this individual player, and that man's name is Austin Ekeler. And the news that I'm talking about is that Keenan Allen is unlikely to play. I mean, we have yet to see a player this year test earlier in the week positive for COVID and be able to test back out by the end of the week. So maybe he does play, but I'm not expecting him to play. Austin Ekeler even said in an interview with Matt Kelly and Roto Underworld that he does not expect Keenan Allen to play, that he's unlikely to play. So now you get Austin Ekeler, who is going to be maybe the biggest beneficiary, going to be maybe the number one target now in this offense with Keenan Allen out there in those short to intermediate passes. I mean, Josh Palmer will fill in for Keenan Allen. He fits that mold. He's 210 pounds. He's like 6'2", so he fits that mold pretty nicely. But I think more trust and more security in the checkdowns for those 5, 6, 7-yard passes are going to go to Ekeler now since Allen's not out there. So I have Ekeler at $8,300 for 22.4 fantasy points. A 28 implied team total is the second highest on the slate, only behind the Chiefs, and he's a 10-point favorite. So all that looks fantastic for Austin Ekeler. He has a positive 59% run blocking advantage against the Giants, who are a bottom 5 run defense. Right now, he already has a matchup. The Giants allow 105 rushing yards per game, the 6th most in the NFL. Over his last 6 games, he's seeing 19.2 opportunities per game since he's been healthy. A 15% target share amongst running backs is top 5 in the NFL. Again, that's only those 6 targets per game that comes out to are only likely to rise with Keenan Allen out. And now what are you getting? Well, you're getting a guy who leads the running backs in receiving yards. He's second in routes run with 24 in the season. He's had 20-plus fantasy points in each of his last 3 games, seeing 5 or more receptions in each of those games. Everything looks good for Austin Ekeler. The floor, the median projection, and the massive ceiling. And oh yeah, the fact that there's not really any other expensive running backs makes it easy to just go up and get him. So I like Ekeler this week. I think a lot of people likely will. I expect his ownership to be around 18 to 16%. So get different somewhere else in your lineup. I take Ekeler over 53.5 rushing yards this week in the good matchup with the 10-point favorite. I have Ekeler for 74 rushing yards in my projections. So over 53.5, we take that. You can combine it with the Russell Wilson prop if you want to. You can take that with something else. And if you use the code SAL, right, limited time offer right now as the season and the year 2021 is ending, so they'll probably change some promotions. Get in code SAL on PrizePicks.com. Free bet up to $100. So there's your top 5 running backs, and now we'll transition into the top 5 wide receivers. And the number 5 wide receiver is attached. He's tethered to Russ Wilson, and this man I like a lot. I put out a tweet earlier in the day about him. $6,500. The price keeps dropping now on DK Metcalf. 16.6 fantasy points, a 25-point implied total, and Russell Wilson coming off of the best game of his season. I was going to say career, but his season so far in terms of efficiency. This is a great spot for DK Metcalf for a couple of reasons. One, the price point is dropping, and if anything, people are going to be a butthurt from, I mean, they just haven't been playing him anyways, but if you were one of the people who took the bullet, I played him in my single entry lineup last week, only gets 11 points. It's not great, but all the underlying usage was great for him. And now he gets a matchup against the number 29 secondary in Houston. Oh yeah, who allows the 10th most passing yards per game to wide receivers. Metcalf plays 81% of the time on the outside. So who are the outside cornerbacks for the Texans? Well, it's going to be Mr. King and Mr. Mitchell. And King on the season is allowing a 78.7% catch rate. It's one of the worst on the season. Mitchell's been a little bit better, but he only weighs 190 pounds, and DK Metcalf is a monster. He's 228 pounds the last time he was tested, so 38-pound advantage on that side, and the other side, a guy was just giving up receptions. This is obviously a fantastic spot, not only for DK Metcalf, but Lockett to an extent. Lockett's kind of close up here on these top receiver values as well. He's kind of just missing the page. He's in my top 10 wide receiver values as well, but I like Metcalf a little more just for obvious reasons. I think he has a better red zone role, and in general, I think he's just a better receiver. And oh yeah, this week he's cheaper, but let's just look at some of the stuff, right, from last week. He's seeing a 7 targets per game, a strong 25% target share. Russ finally looked good, 81% completion last week, and the stats that he put up was 5 catches, 60 yards, and 8 targets. Nothing to ride home about, but let's look at the underlying stats. He had 2 red zone targets, so that's good. He was tackled on the 1-yard line in that game, and one of the red zone targets, I mean, it should have been a reception. It should have been pass interference, if anything. So the usage was good from that regard, but then let's look at this. 137 air yards, the most he's seen since week 3. And in that week 3 game, he saw 6 catches, 170 yards, and a touchdown, 25.7 fantasy points, his second best performance on the season. So you get the matchup, you get Russ looking better, and you get all these underlying stats with the price decreasing and him likely to be lower owned than Tyler Lockett this week. We like that a lot, and we take the over on Prize Picks 59.5 receiving yards of Mr. DK Metcalf. There's a chance he's a low-owned play this week. We'll watch it as the week goes on. Now that a couple thousand of you are watching this, we'll see how the ownership is going to be impacted by me saying his name a couple times in this video and as the week goes on. But yes, DK Metcalf over 59.5 receiving yards. We like that as our third prop we've taken. He's our number 5 wide receiver value. The number 4 wide receiver value is somebody who is coming off a bye, and the week before he faced the team that he's facing this week. And can you think about it? Can you do the math? It's the Cleveland Browns yet again facing the Baltimore Ravens. It's $5,400 Jarvis Landry. I have him for 14.2 fantasy points with a 22.5 point team total here. And he gets Baltimore secondary that ranks 23rd, but I mean, 23rd is clearly bottom 10 in the NFL. It's not good, right? Easy math there. Bottom 10 in the NFL, 23rd, and the numbers add up. But the other thing is that it's worse than that. They just lost Marlon Humphrey for the season. They have been trending as a bottom 5 secondary over the last month of the season, and now they lose their best player, right? They already lost Marcus Peters before the season. This team is dealing with so many injuries, not only on defense, but on offense. And now Marlon Humphreys is gone, who, oh yeah, before the bye week, Jarvis Landry faced this team. He had his best game of the season when he went for 6 catches, 111 yards, 10 targets, over 100 air yards for the first time this year. And he was primarily defended by Marlon Humphrey. So now he's going to primarily go into the slot and probably be defended by Tavon Young, who's been hurt for most of this season, including the last couple of weeks. This is yet again a good spot for Jarvis Landry, who leads this team in target share at 24%. Now that 24% doesn't add up to a high volume passing targets. It's just 6.5, but it's kind of similar to a DK Metcalf, 25% target share, 7 targets per game. These low volume offenses, you're not going to get a lot, but when you're the main guy there at a decent price tag and it's likely average to low ownership, in a good matchup, it starts to look good. And unlike DK Metcalf, I mean, even cheaper, DK himself is cheap, but even cheaper, $1,100 cheaper, is Jarvis Landry, who now Jarvis Landry in back-to-back games has 14 plus fantasy points, who over those last 2 games has a 30% target share, not a 24%, with no Odell out there, and him being the main guy, no Anthony Schwartz out there, right? Kareem Hunt only being out there for one of those games. We'll see how much his role increases, but there's no other receivers. They're throwing at Donovan Peoples-Jones. Rashad Higgins has his own issues that he's dealing with. So the 18 targets, 30% target share over the last 2 games, he's the clear and obvious target for Baker, who, again, he's even banged up. So we said last week that Michael Pittman was kind of like the sketchy guy in the range of the top 5 wide receivers that I can stay away from. Great matchup against the Texans, but a low volume offense. Maybe they run it a little bit more, and it ended up ringing true. Landry kind of fits that mold this week, where I think the projection is fine. You start to question the ceiling on how much he can actually do from a ceiling perspective. So in your smaller field tournaments is where Landry likely becomes a better play. Your larger field GPPs, I probably can separate myself a little bit more. So he's number 4. We now crack into the top 3 wide receivers. And the number 3 wide receiver is going to be a guy that I mean, I love these dudes. Not only is Ekeler going to benefit from the Chargers look fantastic this week in general. So easy of a team. Herbert at 7,100 this week. Such an easy team to stack up. Mike Williams at $6,000 flat. We played Mike Williams. I played him in my single entry lineup last week. He played fantastic. He had a 100+ yard game, and he had 92 yards in the first quarter. I wish we could have gotten a little bit more. He had a red zone target. I have him for 16.9 fantasy points and a 28-point team total, just like Ekeler, the second highest in the slate. He gets a bottom 10 secondary in the New York Giants, where Williams plays 83% of his snaps on the outside. Keenan Allen's usually in the slot. That will likely be this week. Josh Palmer, maybe a mixture of tight ends going to the slot a little bit, but 81% of the time. So who are the outside cornerbacks for the New York Giants? Well, the first one is going to be James Bradbury, who some of you might know. He's not playing as good this year, right? Like 3 years ago, he was with the Panthers. He was a lockdown corner. I mean, the windows on these cornerbacks, unless you're Jalen Ramsey, don't last that long. So he's just playing fine. Like, not bad, not great, but fine. He's allowing a 70% catch rate. On the opposite side, you have Croson, who's been very limited so far. I don't even know if he'll be starting in this game. Very limited, undersized for the most part. So it's a fine matchup for Mike Williams. You're not concerned about that. He'll move into the slot maybe 20% of the time or so. So he's been seeing a solid target share this year. 7.8 targets per game. You like to see that for Mike Williams. And now that should only increase from, instead of being like a 21% target share, to 26 to 28% with no Keenan Allen. He plays for the Chargers, who are number 3 in passing plays per game. You saw last week, finally after a month or so, a month to a month and a half since really the Browns game, you saw Justin Herbert being allowed to throw downfield. I don't know why the game plan was not allowing him to throw downfield more. And what happens when that happened? Well, they get up to a 24-0 lead. You have jump balls twice in the first quarter for Mike Williams looking good. He sees his first 100-yard air yard game since week 5. It ended up translating to the 100-yard receiving game on 7 targets. He now has 19 or more fantasy points in 2 of his last 3 games. So expect more downfield usage. Mike Williams, who doesn't leave the field, number 10 in routes run per game in the NFL amongst receivers, now has no Keenan Allen out there. Even better for Mike Williams. I like him a lot this week. Stacking him up with the Chargers in general looks good. Stacking him up with another player who's going to be on this list, spoiler alert from the Chargers, looks good as well. And that player is not number 2, so he is number 1. The number 2 guy, though, is a player who a lot of people might be a little bit hesitant on this week, and I think we might be able to get some leverage because of that. The number 2 wide receiver this week, and a lot of these guys are in the mid-range, guys. A lot of them. You don't have Cooper Kupp on the main slate, right? So many of these guys are in the mid-range. Like we talked about all the receivers being in the mid-range. Who else is in the mid-range that we just talked about? DK Metcalf, Landry, all of them, Mike Williams, and so is $5,700 DJ Moore. So the mid-range is going to be where a lot of great plays are this week, which means if there's great plays there, ownership is going to come in on the mid-range, which means if you start to go up towards those guys at the top, right, you start, and at the running back position, there's really nobody. Maybe you go up to the top and get different with like a Leonard Fournette yet again for the third week in a row. Maybe you go up to the top and get different with a Joe Mixon. We'll see what the ownership's looking like. But at the wide receiver position, I mean, you have Tyreek Hill up there who's coming off of one of the worst games, if not the worst game of his career with the Patrick Mahomes era. You have Stephon Diggs coming off of a bad game, but the weather really did that one. And then you drop down to already being in the low 7K range since Keenan Allen is out. So there's not overall a lot of ways to spend your money this week. I think spending your money, you're going to be able to do it by paying up for the stud quarterbacks, maybe paying up since all the stud tight ends are on the slate, right? But for the most part, running back, wide receiver, mid-range is pretty loaded, if not the lower to middle range, right? So number 2, DJ Moore at 5,700. I have him for 17.5 fantasy points. That might seem like a lot. 23-point team implied total, a matchup against the number 26 Atlanta secondary. Their secondary is terrible, but they have one really good piece in that secondary, and DJ Moore has seen him once this year. They have A.J. Terrell in that secondary, who allows just 0.35 yards per cover out. He's been one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL this year. I mean, it might literally go, A.J. Terrell might be the best cornerback in the NFL this year. Like, Ramsey's up there, but Ramsey's playing this different hybrid role in the middle of the field, slot cornerback. Terrell might literally be the best lockdown cornerback in the NFL, second-year player. You saw DJ Moore play against A.J. Terrell earlier this year, and he ended up posting 4 catches, 59 yards on 8 targets, so like 10 fantasy points, 9.9. But we have to look a little bit more into that. He was playing with Sam Darnold, who had a 48% completion percentage in that game. DJ Moore, I don't think, is going to get shadowed by A.J. Terrell. DJ Moore moves into the slot enough about a third of the time so that he'll get away from A.J. Terrell at least that much. So let's not just look at that one sample because, again, Sam Darnold completed 48% of his passes. If you're an NFL quarterback completing below 60% of your passes, that's alarming. Below 50% is like, what are you even doing out there on the field? I mean, it was atrocious. But when you start to look at this, you see DJ Moore's coming off of a bye, so his name's not in the media as much. The week before that, it was like the worst game ever for Cam Newton, getting pulled for P.J. Walker, not even throwing for 100 yards in like 3.5 quarters. It was terrible. And even in that game, DJ Moore, with a combination of those two quarterbacks, yeah, he went for over 100 yards, right? He went for over 100 yards in that game. So that's how good he is. But on the season, he's top 5 in target share, 28.5%. If you remember the first month to 5 weeks of the season, he was like the best wide receiver in the NFL. Everybody loved him, and that's kind of cooled off since Sam Darnold has struggled in the quarterbacks in general. But he's seeing over 9 targets per game. He still hit that 100-plus yards and 10 targets with a combo of Cam Newton and P.J. Walker playing as bad as you can before the bye week, and you would hope at least after the bye week they can script at least the first quarter of the game to look good here. But DJ Moore, I'm expecting not that high of ownership. He's in a price range around Mike Williams, who's definitely going to get a little bit more popular this week. He's in a price range around all those other running backs. Right there is Antonio Gibson, right? Some of the other running backs, if Elijah Mitchell plays, is only like $1,000 more. So he's in that mid-range where I think people are just going to overlook him. They're going to say, Cam Newton, I don't want to go back there. But the matchup is actually solid. When he's not next, even when A.J. Terrell's on him, DJ Moore is one of these wide receivers. I'm not too concerned about the overall matchup. So DJ Moore looks pretty solid. The dude doesn't leave the field. He's top 10 in routes run. He's number 15 in target rate. He's number 12 in wide receiver snaps at 88%. DJ Moore, the number 2 wide receiver. Now, the number 1 receiver, I said he's from the same team as Mike Williams and Mr. Austin Ekeler. And he's the flat minimum, $3,000, the rookie Joshua Palmer. At $3,000, I have Josh Palmer for 9.5 fantasy points, 28-point team total. He's by far the best flat minimum play. He's by far the best value play on the entire week if you're looking for cheap guys. And he gets that same matchup that Mike Williams is getting on the outside. He'll likely see the slot more. Keenan Allen's not playing. He's played 41% of his snaps. The majority of Josh Palmer's snaps have been from the slot. So I think you'll see Robinson, if Robinson is still going to play the slot this week, who is about 20 pounds less than Josh Palmer. Josh Palmer is this, not the exact same extent as Chris Godwin. Godwin's got like 10 more pounds on him, but he's this Chris Godwin plus size receiver that can play out of the slot. He's the 6'2", 210, 215 pound wide receiver who has that edge in the slot. And now his quarterback, he's tethered in a good game environment with now a lot more opportunities tethered to Justin Herbert at $3,000 flat. It looks good. Like, he is a better receiver than Jalen Guyton. So he might actually be the best receiver on the field, not counting Austin Ekeler. Like, Mike Williams is clearly, like, if we really want to argue, the best receiver on the field for his skill set. But if you're talking about the overall for what they're trying to replace from Keenan Allen, Guyton's not going to replace that. Mike Williams isn't going to replace Keenan Allen. It's going to be Josh Palmer's skill set going to be able to replace that. So for a guy who could potentially see 8 targets in this game, yeah, I do think Palmer could be that guy. So on the season, he only has 21 total targets, but we're not too concerned about that. We're concerned with him filling the 90% of the snaps Keenan Allen, 37 routes run per game, right? Palmer's already been running 10 to 15 routes a week. He's had one game where 2 weeks ago where he played 20 plus routes. So he already has somewhat of a chemistry with the first team offense, being the wide receiver 4 in the year, playing in most of these games, averaging at least 10 routes in all these games so far this year, and in some games touching 20 plus. So he has that chemistry. He has 8 targets over his last 4 games. So Herbert has been looking his way. And now when you take out Keenan Allen, I think there's a lot of upside here. The 2021, this past year's third round rookie, 6'1", 210 pounds, is ready to rock and roll. So Palmer is the number 1 wide receiver value right now. We'll see how high his ownership gets. The average person is not going to know who the hell this guy is, right? They don't even know who Jalen Guyton is on the own team. The guy was running 30 routes a week out there for the Chargers and Herbert already. So there you go. There's your top 10 values. 5 at the running back, 5 at the wide receiver. I appreciate you tuning in. We schmacked you. We schmacked you around. Actually, I actually did have another prop. Over DJ Moore, 55.5 receiving yards. So there's your fourth prop. We schmacked you at 4 props. Prize Picks, use the code SAL on that. And the other props, you get a free bet up to $100. So there you go. I appreciate it. We're like 50 subscribers away from 45,000. So if you have a second, subscribe button pops up on the YouTube channel. I appreciate that a ton. And if you're interested in tracking the projections throughout the week as news comes up, and ownership, the biggest piece in all of DFS, if you understand ownership, if you have somebody's ownership projections, which I have down below on Patreon, you have a massive leg up. The only thing that matters in GPPs, the only thing, obviously there's other things, but the most important thing is ownership, so you can understand where you can get different. That is exactly why the entire Discord, people were winning $20,000 and $50,000 last week, and even people just winning their first ever $1,000 or $500. That's why the Discord, the Patreon members were popping off, because we nailed the leverage plays. The George Kittles, the Justin Jeffersons, the Miles Sanders. It doesn't happen every single week, but when it does happen, when you do nail the appropriate plays, you jump up the leaderboards and just win all the money. So if you want to come in there, you want to check that out, down below on Patreon, you can check it out. So thank you for tuning in today. I'll see you in the next video that is going to be later today, Thursday Night Football video. And if you're watching this after Thursday Night Football happens, we're going to have a top stacks video out Thursday. Final thoughts on Friday. Very, very in-depth show, so be sure to be ready for that. And then Saturday, that one dude, Sunday live stream. So I'll see you when I see you, gang, and I'll see you all in the next one.